Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Seek Power podcast, the show about all things competitive eternal and helping you get better at the game. My name is Paradox, also known as Brandon, and joining me all the way over from Quebec is my co-host, TonyGeeeee.
Hello, how are you, dude?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, Tony?
Doing pretty great. Had a pretty busy weekend.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. We had similar weekend outings despite living 4,000 miles away from each other. I heard that you went to a wedding.
Yeah, it's actually my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, but they're still friends, and we're friends. Both of us are still friends with the couple that got married, so it was a whole lot of fun. Um, yeah,
Oh, good,
the
good.
morning after wasn't so great, but the wedding was nice.
Had a little bit too much there.
Yeah,
Uh,
that happens.
that happens. That happens. Well, that's funny because I had on the same day. This was the day of the ETS, by the way, which is why neither of us played. I had a bachelor party, but over here in Oregon, bachelor parties are not big ragers. So when people have a bachelor party or something like that, that usually just means let's just all go hiking and just go climb a mountain, and that's exactly what we did. We climbed Saddle Mountain, and that was a absolutely beautiful hike. Also, the next morning for me was not so good because my legs were exhausted. Despite being a regular hiker and runner, that was pretty tough. That was pretty tough, but it was great day, and certainly a nice break from my normal ETS Saturdays.
Yeah, and I mean, you gave a spot, right, in the top eight because
Sure.
you're always top eighting, right? So now there's 8 players that were like, nice, now I got a shot.
I, perhaps, if we want to phrase it that way. Uh, yeah, we'll see. It is, yeah, it's still more chances for me to keep up the streak. I haven't lost the streak just yet. But without further ado, why don't we go ahead and talk about the ETS results from this weekend? We had a really great looking top eight. I didn't get to see the tournament just yet. I still want to go back and watch the VOD, the videos. But just looking at the top eight in Eternal Warcry, it looks like we had a really great, diverse list, as well as a couple of what I would say were maybe slightly expected metagame shifts, but certainly doesn't take away from the accomplishment or anything like that. Just really excellent movement and great diversity overall. So yeah, go ahead. Starting at number one, we have Volcano Valkyries by Tobo from Team ET, and I believe he is now. I don't know if that was back-to-back wins for him.
Oh no, Moosh. Well, ET went back to back, but
Oh, that's right.
Moosh won last week, and now it's Tobo.
Gotcha. That's right. That's right. Either way, first place with Volcano Valkyries, and that's a list very much like FJS removal pile type decks, but with no shadow involved. At second place, we have the very not properly named Elves list, which is uh, Praxis tokens at second place. Third place, we have Akaria Blue by Team SPG's very own Dralichek, which is great. Also in third place, tied, we have Nightfall Berserk, a Feln Berserk deck. Then we have Xenon Killers in the fifth place spot by level 13 David. We have TJP Blitz in fifth place by The Rock. We have another Praxis tokens, I believe. Yes, a very aggressively slanted Praxis tokens, but Praxis tokens nonetheless. And then finally in the last spot, also tied for fifth, is a old favorite FTP Moment of Creation. I'm really glad to see that back. Overall, that gives us about two control decks, Moment and Ikaria Blue. Two, three-ish mid-range decks, depending on how you define Praxis tokens. I would say it's probably mid-range, which would probably make it more like three or four, with two Praxis tokens, Mercano mid-range, and Xena Killers. And then we have two Berserk decks rounding it out, with TJP Berserk and Film Berserk. Overall, a really great spread. Definitely a good representation of a lot of factions, definitely a lot of viable archetypes. And yeah, some really great movement in that I was talking about by Xenon Midrange. It seemed really, really well poised for a lot of reasons that we'll break down in just a second. And Icaria Blue also seeming very well positioned, as well as FTP Moment. And both of those lists in particular seem really great for one particular card, and that is Hailstorm.
Oh
Hail,
yes.
Hailstorm seems very, very strong right now, hitting a lot of things, but it just hasn't quite had the deck to support it up to now. But now that the sort of the tide has settled and the decks have become a little bit more defined, control decks can start to really bring out the proper answers that they need, and Hailstorm is one of those answers that has been so desperately needed up to this point. So really great to see that in there. Tony, I know that you are a big fan of Icaria Blue, and you are very happy to see Drolicek take this all the way up to third place. What do you think about his list and just about Icaria Blue right now in this metagame?
Yeah, when we started thinking about which kind of decks we'd like to bring, Jolicek, Trumpets, and I are very big into like Icaria Blue or weapon-based control decks, and we looked into Icaria Blue for a way to efficiently beat the current meta, and especially TJP Blitz, which we pretty much everybody agreed that it was like the tier 1 deck, or the deck to beat coming up to the season 3, week 3 of the season 3 ETS. And when we tried different versions, and you know, when on ladder, I had a good success with a particular version, which is only one of a one card different from the Droly check, and trumpets came in ninth, so we
Oh wow.
almost had two Icaria blues in the top eight. Well, at least we have two in the top nine. And yeah, so Droly checks and trumpets version have, I think, about one card difference, so let's say they're similars. And it's just the fact that you have so many ways to kill your opponent's units on their own turn. You have Lightning Strike, you have Iden's Choice, you have Bring Down, and you have Torch, of course. So all of these very good answers, paired with very good removal like Vanquish, Hailstorm, Harsh Rule, and Runehammer, make for a very efficient Icardi deck. We see the kind of downfall of FJS this week, where uh, their its popularity has dwindled over the past week, and uh, no FJS made the top eight. And maybe right now Icaria Blue is the better FJS, just because it can answer way more efficiently those kind of small creatures that have aegises and that can get buffed infinitely. Uh, so yeah, I feel like we see the kind of evolution of Rakano-based control slash mid-range decks. Of course, Icaria Blue, this Icaria Blue version is much more control-centric, but it's not so different from FJS, right? You have your
Hmm.
card draw. Of course, Blue offers way better card draw, but you still have like your base things like Vanquishers or Slays, but Slays and Vanquish are somewhat similar in that regard. You have Torch, you have some weapons, you have Rise, of course Icaria as your top end, Harsh Rule, things like that. So yeah, I see the rise of Icaria Blue as just a logical evolution to the current metagame. And yeah, I'm very happy, Jolly Check got third slash fourth, and also of course Trumpet being nine is also very very good. So
Hmm.
I think that they both made a very solid choice coming on to this week.
Yeah, I actually hadn't realized that he had just missed out on Breakers, so that's really great for him. And it really does seem like a logical sort of evolution of sort of the Icaria decks right here. With the exception, of course, of Tobo. I did say that it was kind of like FJS, but that's not really a fair assessment because his Volcano Valkyries list is actually a much more proactive list than a typical
Mhm.
FJS. He plays like 30 something units, looks like 31 units with whirling duos and um, the little baby Akaria Valkyrie Captain. And he's more of a ramp centered list with both of his two drops, Bullet Shaper and Akaria Valkyrie Captain, aiming to help quickly churn out Icarias as fast as possible and Rizons as fast as possible. Whereas Icaria Blue is more like FJS in terms of really what it's trying to accomplish. It's more control centered and it plays just way more removal and way less ways to actually win. It's more like a typical control deck. And I have to say that the introduction of both Bring Down, which hasn't really been utilized much before in an Icaria Blue Shell, and um, the reintroduction of Lightning Strike, which is seen play from time to time, is really great, and it does highlight the fact that these colors, these factions, have way more options to remove units on your opponent's turn, and that's kind of been a weaker spot of FJS right now. It just can't handle a lot of the Berserk decks. It can't these decks that kind of sit there with their stuff and they got like a big hand of cards and one little 2/3 on the field and you say okay go and then all of a sudden you're at 20 life and then you're dead because they just blow you up with a double damage 10/10 berserking flying so on and so forth. And cards like Bring Down look a whole lot better than Slay at that moment. You're able to you take advantage of the fact that they just dumped everything into this unit just to cleanly wipe it off the field. Um, Another card also that does very well here is Island's Choice, being able to not only destroy uh, big, huge units that are bulked up with other things, but also able to counter opponents in um, control mirrors or just from them doing any other big thing, such as with FTP Moment coming in,
Mhm.
countering or negating a Moment of Creation is a pretty big game right now.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah, oh, go ahead.
A- And coming back to Record of Valkyries, I had a quick chat with Tobo after his win. I just told him like, "Hey, congrats, you won" and stuff. And I was surprised because I feel like this version really, really wants the Roland's intervention, right? The one mana Valkyrie
Yeah,
protect. And
I was thinking
I
about that.
asked him like because I faced him on ladder maybe an hour before the ETS, and he was playing this. I was playing Icaria Blue and I was really playing around this one mana protect, and turns out he just didn't have it, which I was really happy about. Uh, and yeah, I told him like I'm kind of surprised you didn't have this card. And he was like, yeah, this he feels like yeah the card this one mana protect card should could maybe be slotted in. And also, he told me he feels like maybe adding Shadow would be better. So it's kind of funny because FJS is on like a downfall, and he wants to put Shadow and make his Recon Valkyries basically FJS Valkyries deck, which I feel like is makes a lot of sense. And of course, like Tobo is a great player, so like his instincts are spot on, and of course if he feels like that way it's because like there's good reasons to do so. But it's really funny that in like he won with a certain type, and those other players that played the FJS just didn't have success this week. So yeah, I found it a bit funny. But yeah, still, I feel like the Rocano, straight Rocano still has some advantages. Mainly that you can slot in more cards like the one mana protect, whereas it's way harder to do that when you have another color, right? Because okay, so you want some annihilates, you maybe want some sabotage, you want some slays. So if you put in all of those new cards, you have to cut a lot more cards, which means that those cards that almost made it, but just didn't make it in the Recano version, will almost for sure not make it in the FJS version. So I'd be very serious to see if Tobo wants to innovate on his own list and see what he can come up with, because yeah, this is a very interesting list. Yeah, as you said, a bit more mid-rangey, and we see Amelie as a 5-drop in a world where Equivocate, Vanquish, Annihilate is all the rage. So I mean, I'm very happy for Tobo, but it's honestly a bit surprising that this kind of list made it to to the finals and even won, in my opinion.
Well, that is something that we'll definitely be talking about in a little bit. But I think at least in this case, it's almost like a Millie is your second Rizon, because sometimes Rizon is just there. In my opinion, it's very good against aggro, right? Especially with the lifesteal procs. But almost more than anything, I feel like Rizon forces the removal to make
Hmm.
sure that your Karya is unopposed and that
Yep.
they don't have much to your Karya. And I think some people have been kind of doubling down on that and having more means or more ways to make sure that they can get around that. And so by putting a million, it's almost like you're putting in a new Rizon. And now it's like this chain. It's like if a milli goes unanswered, you're probably gonna, you're gonna lose that game. And then so you have to answer a milli, and then there's the Rizon. Oh, geez, do I answer this or do I answer the Akari? And it puts it just constantly is dropping big threats, just starting 5, 6, 7 with Amelia Rizon and Akari, and that they had to have something to stop all of these. Um, and because he's ramping, I think he that allows him to get away with not or with playing these cards that are a little bit more vulnerable, right? Because he's
Hmm.
just dropping the biggest, scariest things he can. On the note of Roland's Intervention, I believe is the card name. Roland's Intervention, the one cost protect in this
Yep.
type of deck. I almost wonder if this is the type of deck where playing just one of those is correct. Because you have Torch alongside it, and you don't probably want too many because there's a couple matchups where it's not that good. But if you have just one, you can play a lot of mind games with it in Torch where the opponent sees the pause and they just go, oh, well, it's probably Torch. But what if it's Roland's Intervention?
Yeah.
And they have to sit and they have to think, and it's gonna get like that kind of thing can take a lot of games out of nowhere.
Hmm.
Can really steal a lot of games. Um, but all in all, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Once again, a great deck and definitely an interesting sway from the FJS that we had. I do want to talk briefly about our two copies of Praxis tokens in the top eight. I do think that this makes a lot of sense. It seems like TJP in particular, and TJP and FJS both have a really hard time against Praxis tokens because there is neither of them are particularly well suited for dealing with going wide. Uh, TJP has to play a lot of small units and they don't really have much lifesteal, and they're just kind of getting ready to kind of do one big hit. And if they can't fly over, then you're just going to chump with something like a Grenadin. And FJS, it's got harsh rules, and that's about it. And then all the slays look really silly against assembly lines and Xenon obelisks and things like that. So it seems like this is um, a really smart iteration going into this week on sort of time based decks, and I'm very glad that it exists. I know a lot of people really hate Praxis tokens, but I think it does a good job of keeping the metagame honest and making sure that people don't get too into their how can I best one-to-one removal my opponents.
Yeah, and those two lists are very different. I feel like, of course, if I don't want to be too results oriented here, but I feel like the one that made to the finals is a bit better, just because way more four ofs and four Heart of the Vault, which turns out Heart of the Vault is a very good card, and you kind of want four. Uh, but yeah, it's it's such a good deck, and when
Mhm.
like it's basically set three praxis tokens, but then you added Teacher of Humility, which is a good card. Turns out that Teacher of Humility wins games on its own. So an already strong deck adding a almost one card win condition is excellent, and it's a very proactive and very reliable kind of low to the ground mid range. I'd say it's not aggro, but it's not like a big mid range. So I'd say low to the ground mid range. It's kind of the range where it's at, and I really prefer also the time market over the red market, just because having the obelisk just being able to have close to 7 obelisks is seems super good. And also, like, you can be
Mhm.
super greedy with like Vault of the Praxis, which I've gotten blown out by a whole lot, and it's super
Yeah.
annoying, especially when usually players have like one relic removal in their markets, right? So like they have to answer Obelisk and Vault of the Praxis. So if you time it correctly, either one or the other is gonna survive. So yeah, it's very very strong, and um, yeah, now Hailstorm is a thing, and it's because that deck really doesn't want to see Hailstorms in the meta, and that's why
Oh
I
no.
think it's like one of the main reasons why it did so well. It's just
Yeah.
because like lack of sweepers except Herschel,
Yeah,
and
lack of hailstorms and
yep,
the tokens come out.
yep.
So that's definitely the two new angles I think from this week is the decks that take advantage of lack of hailstorms and now the new emerging decks with hailstorms are coming out in numbers, and that's going to create a lot of really nice mixing here, really nice mixing and movement in the metagame. That's really great, and I do agree with you that I both lists are great, but I do have to say that at least on paper the uh, the second place list by Robot Dinosaur, I'm definitely a little bit more partial to. I really like not only the copies of Heart of the Vault and the Time Merchant to be able to grab the extra Xenon Obelisk, which is such a big card for this deck and makes it a lot smoother. But so much interesting tech here. I really like the Vault of the Praxis choice. There's a Talir's choice in the market. I don't even know entirely what that's for, but man, I want to know more about it because that is
Well, it's kind of a
it's
rally,
it
right?
is a rally. Yeah, I guess it's like a time rally because it does. Yeah, it does get +2. So that is yeah. I guess that does make sense. That does make sense. And then the Humbug Swarm's coming in. Even a lot of the older Praxis tokens list didn't play Humbug Swarm, but I'm glad to see that old card come out. And yeah, just a lot of great things here. Really, just a lot of great things. And yeah, why don't we go ahead and cap this off then? Briefly, let's talk about um, Xenon Killers. I've been talking about how this deck is so well positioned for weeks now, and sure enough, David comes in and does well with it. So that's really great. I like. I mean, I just like everything about the list, but I think I think he does a lot of correct choices right now. Namely, that he actually dropped Iron from the main deck.
Yep.
Iron just is not that good right now. There could be a time where Iron comes back and is needed, but he goes down to just two different 3 drops with Aurelian Merchant and Auric Interrogator, and I think that's really what you want. You don't necessarily need the Dawn Walker package in a deck like this, and he really keeps it overall very low to the ground and keeps it an obelisk oriented list with some all eds in there, and I think that's really great. And then beyond that, we have I suppose we should also give a mention to the Feln Berserk list
Yeah,
since that hasn't been talked about.
that kind of
Uh,
came out of the blue, right?
yeah,
I
well,
saw a couple on ladder, but that's about it. I didn't see a lot of that deck pretty
so
much
a
ever. And
yeah, so there's a lesser known player that I mean some people have heard of him. He's been a big champion of this deck for a while now. His you might have heard of him. His name's Ilya K. He's not particularly outspoken, but he has been playing this deck for a little bit now, and sure enough, somebody, not him, but somebody else does play. Dr. Pringles gets to play this, and I don't know how close it is to his list because I don't have it in front of me, but it's kind of a tempo-oriented list that really just kind of wants to do Dusk Raider, Haunting Scream, Rindra, and then Gift of Battle type stuff, and just blow people up. A little bit, almost more like a aggro combo than it is like a tempo list,
yeah,
and
and
um, it looks great. I haven't actually played against it, but it looks great.
oh yeah, it's super hard to play against when
Yeah.
you're kind of a control deck because like when they haunting screen gift and something with berserk or they use gift of
Oh.
battle and then they rapid shot. Rapid shot with gift of battle is a 2 mana deal 8 damage.
Yeah, I was gonna say
It's
Rapid Shot is
insane.
yeah. Rapid Shot is the best card to have alongside Berserk. So, if anything, this seems like a really yeah. We've used this word a couple times today, but it seems like a really logical conclusion to take a really logical path for Gift of Battle and just Berserk in general is to pair it alongside Rapid Shot and Haunting Scream to just keep getting it back again and again and again and again. So that's really great. We'll probably be seeing more of that, I'm guessing. That third place finish definitely can't be the last time
Yep.
we'll see that.
And also
Um,
Also,
Oh, go ahead.
shout out to Dr. Pringles. I feel like he's one of the most
Y-
underrated player out
y-
there. He's like
yes.
he's consistently very like in the invitationals in the last two. I think it's he's only two showings in the invitational. He went and he got super good results, and he's always up there. He makes consistent top eights as well, and he's like he's a very strong player, and I feel like he's really under the radar right now, and yeah, I feel like he doesn't get the respect he should be getting. Yeah, he's very very strong, and he should be getting a team soon, right? I don't think he's on the team.
I
I I'm not quite
I'm not
sure.
sure. But yeah, Dr. Pringle's definitely underrated player, definitely flying under the radar. And to add on to what you just said, I would say that um, there is a lot of players right now that just aren't getting the respect they deserve. And because there's just a lot of great players out there. And I want you to know, as somebody who has been there before, that don't give up and keep doing what you do, and that a lot of people are looking out for you, even if we aren't shouting your names and whatnot. That we are, you know, people are looking at who's up and coming and who's to who's out there. So yeah,
We're
shout out to
watching
Doc.
you.
We're watching now. um, yeah, rounding out this list, I do want to briefly talk about FTP moments. Um, this just seems like a great time for it to come back. Thinking about the options that it has, this player, Dark Hands, played a lot of really great options as far as removal goes for this type of weekend. Equivocate still very strong. There's 4 copies of Equivocate, 4 copies of Torch, always good. 3 Purifies. Purify is still absolutely fantastic right now, hitting uh, pretty much most of the units that you want to hit. There's lots of things that are no bigger than 3. Of course, we have 4 Hailstorms, which, as we've been talking about, is exactly what you want to be doing right now against a lot of decks. And this one I really, really like is 3 Scorpion Wasps.
Yeah.
I do believe we're going to be talking a little bit more about Scorpion Wasp later on, but with all these flying units that are just trying to get in for big hunks but don't have overwhelm, Scorpion Wasp is 3 cost to kill anything and go right through all those stand-togethers, making it pretty effective. As far as non-removal new choices go, new cards, we have finally a home for Worm Calling, one of my favorite cards from the new set. The 3 cost, double time, create and draw 2/7/7 worms. It gives you more worms to play, more big things to be dropping, which is a lot of what this deck is doing, while at the same time fueling your moment of creation. So absolutely great inclusion. I think that's really smart, and I didn't actually think about that, even though it seems really obvious looking at it. I didn't think of that originally because I wasn't sure about what the future of FTB moment was. We haven't seen that deck in quite some time, but here it is, and it's back, and it's making top 8. So congratulations to Dark Hands, and hope we get to see a little bit more of FTP moment.
Yeah. I feel like right now it could add like a bit of limitates. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that could be an option as well in terms of spells. I don't know what to cut though. I basically never played this deck, but I feel like limitate is very strong right now, and maybe it could have a slot over strategize or something like that, just for the utility, especially since you have so many targeted removal like Torch Purify. Uh, and of course, equivocate stuff like that. So having the ability to proc an Aegis is very strong, and sometimes you don't have the wasps, right? Of course,
Sometimes you don't. Mm-hmm.
countering Icaria with a wasp is extremely good, but sometimes you might not have this option. So like levitate is also very strong, and I feel like it could have an inclusion, but I'm not sure. And I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a good point. Definitely about the strategizes, though there is something to be said about uh, the game being sort of so tempo and so oriented and so fast right now that you don't often have the time to even cast a strategize.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's entirely true, but I do think there are probably a lot of cases where it definitely feels like that. So there's definitely that aspect. Um, and yeah, levitate. It might just be a deck slot issue where they just didn't quite know where to include it, but that said, the very clean 4 ofs of this list for the most part is That makes a lot of sense and definitely makes for probably a very streamlined and efficient deck.
Yeah, and
But
for Heart of Vault is very good. For Titans is very good. So yeah, Torch is very good. Like it's just a slew of very good cards that's paired with like a million ways to make Moment insane.
yeah,
So yeah, it's we're gonna see more of that deck for sure.
yep. I think we're going to see more. And this is, I said it on Twitter earlier, but this is just, in my opinion, this is the best metagame we've had in a long time.
Oh
And
yeah.
just seeing stuff like this is I think, just proof of that. We have such a diverse metagame here in our top eight over a month in. There's nothing that feels too strong. And honestly, I'm looking at this top eight, and I think there is still a ton of room for more growth and for more strategies to really shine and come through. And that's just great. And normally, sometimes when I feel like there's too much diversity like this, it can feel like you can't even metagame. But so many of these are really based around a lot of the same sort of weak cards that you can still really counter stuff, right? Scorpion Wasp being a perfect example of something that counters both Berserk and Ikaria, two of the big threats right now. And so you can there's just a lot of crazy things, but you don't feel so restrained. You don't feel like you're going out there and just saying, I hope I just outdraw them, or I hope I just kind of, don't go up against my terrible matchups. There's a lot of diversity without a lot of straining and kind of chokehold on what you can and can't do. So yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Before we get into the heart of our episode with kind of a lot of what we've been talking about already this far, with kind of what's old and what's new, and how to adapt to all these new threats and these new things. We do need to take a very brief segue and talk about the new promo card from this last week, Wyatt. Um, Actually, don't have his full name in front of me. It is Wyatt Junk Collector. There it is. Uh, Infamously, the man on Smuggler Stash. I cannot believe that this person is his own card, is his own figure, but I am very happy about it because that's it's been a very famous face throughout all of Eternal, the Wyatt's face with his kind of shrinky, squinting eye and his maniacal smile. He's just hilarious looking, and he also has some fantastic voiceovers in case you've gotten against him already, talking about the riffraff and stuff. But Wyatt is a 2/2, one shadow and one fire influence for a 2-cost 2/2 quick draw. It reads, when Wyatt hits the enemy player, discard a card to draw the top card of their deck, their being their enemy that you hit. And after 3 hits, create and draw Smuggler Stash. He's also conveniently a Gunslinger Rogue, and definitely Gunslinger has a relevant unit type. Rogue, not quite yet, but we've seen a couple of Rogue cards. Overall, it's kind of on the lower power end of things, but definitely still in the realm of playable. Gunslinger is very important, and I like to compare it a little bit to Volcano Outlaw, and as sad as it is, I almost think that this card is maybe a little bit better than Volcano Outlaw, just because Warcry doesn't do a lot, and the ability to filter cards by discarding things and drawing new ones is really strong. You don't necessarily always want to discard things, but often if you are flooded with power, then having Wyatt on there is very good to get rid of those things and get new stuff. So I definitely can see Wyatt seeing his way into more Stone Scar Gunslinger decks, and probably not too much more than that, but we could see some things. I also like that it activates Tribute, which is really nice too. And even though there's not a ton of Tribute options currently in Stone Scar, or at least like Tribute payoffs, but having this gives us some future options, which is nice. And I hear, Tony, that you had a pretty nice experience on the receiving end of Wyatt this past week.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was an experience. So I was playing versus Patrick Chapin. Is he the lead designer
He
or
is
is he the...
the lead designer of this game,
Okay.
at
And
least so we're told.
so he always likes to play the new stuff, like the new promos on ladder. When I remember when Coastal, what was her name? The 5-4, the
Oh,
5-4
Coastal Brigand.
entrance. Sorry, what did you say?
I had Brigand. Coastal Brigand, the 5-4 endurance that
Yeah,
makes a 8-8 bear.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. When that just came out, he just smashed ladder with his version of like ways to discard things and just playing a 5-mana 5-4 that spawns an 8-8. It was amazing. Yeah, so I was playing Icaria Blue and he was playing Stone Scar Gunslingers. I was hanging on by a thread and he just played this card, and I played Icaria, so I had something very good on the top of my deck. Was it exactly on the top, or was it in the top five? I didn't know, but Patrick Chapin knew because, of course, he probably, since he he's the designer of the game. He probably has this kind of tool that says like, okay, so my opponent has this card on top of his deck, right? So he put a weapon on Wyatt in a way that I couldn't block with Icaria, or else it died. So he hit my face with Wyatt, and then the next turn he drew. Well, he actually played a was it a 1916 rune hammer? So that was a thing. I was a bit tilted. Luckily, I top decked a Winchester Merchant and got Vision of Austerity, so I was able to remove this weapon. But that was one of those feels good slash feels bad moment where I was like, "What? Really? You did that?" And to top it off, it was Patrick Chapin, so it was very very fun. I tried to add him, but he didn't accept me because I'm not cool enough. So hopefully one
Oh,
day I'm gonna have better games against him, and I'm gonna be able to add him. Please add me,
tragic.
Patrick.
Please notice us, Patrick. Notice us. That's great. That's yeah, and it's I do think it's just the ability to do stuff like that that really makes Rakano this card better than Rakano Outlaw in a lot of scenarios. But Volcano Outlaw in general is not that good, and so that's not a particularly high bar to get over, I suppose. But that will lead us now actually into the main topic of our episode, and what we want to talk about is uh, the metagame has changed a lot since Dusk Road. Even though we have a lot of the same faction combos and a lot of the more or less the same decks, there are also a ton of new decks, and even of the old decks, the strategies that are being employed and utilized are definitely different, and we have a very different way that the game feels than we've ever had before. And the result of this is that a lot of cards that historically have been good are really just they're just kind of weak. We didn't have set rotation, but at the same time, it kind of feels like set rotation because we a lot of these old mainstays and old things are really falling by the wayside. And so what we wanted to do today is give our perspectives on really what is strong right now and why they're strong, and what cards that we do see on ladder every here and there that we think that people should really not be playing anymore, and ways in which you can uh, adapt your decks, or even just change your decks and change your strategy so that you can be more successful, and in the process help you understand not just necessarily what you should change, but why you should change, and really why these strategies are the kind of like what they're doing, and why they're imposing the types of sort of, I don't know, you could say restrictions, I suppose, on decks now. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk about some cards that we'll talk about cards that are maybe not so good, and then in the process explain sort of the way the metagame is to that puts this pressure on these old cards that makes them not as strong. And I've mentioned it a million times, so let's just go ahead and start off with Rakana Outlaw. And Rakana Outlaw falls into a a, a group of cards. I would say it's Rakano Outlaw. Um, Other cards belong here, maybe things like Thaddeus from Skycrag, and there's a couple that are inching into this territory but aren't quite there. Uh, Oni Ronin, um, Pyro Knight is almost there, but to some extent we'll explain. But just a lot of these really just kind of small units, and even some larger ones as well, that mostly just serve as vanilla plain beaters. These units that they aren't like fully vanilla, right? Mercado Outlaw has Warcry and Quick Draw, but all things considered, it's just a 2-2 for 2. It's got nice things, but it's still limited in the sense that it is a 2-2 for 2. Oni Ronin, a 2-1 for 1 with no evasion. Vadius, a 3-2 for 3. And yes, it has quick draw and Aegis, which are both strong, but that's a very small amount of stats on a 3-drop in a world that is just doing uh, much bigger and crazier things. And so why are these cards not as strong? Well, it's not that they're necessarily useless, but they're or unplayable, but their viability is limited, and the reason for that is because what really defines the metagame right now. Taking a look at some of our top decks, we have TJP Berserk and other Berserk decks, maybe like Felm is probably up there. We have various time mid-range decks. We have the FJ X decks, whether that's Icaria Blue or Removal Pile, FJS, or just those Recon Valkyries. And we also have, I don't know if it's quite tier 1, but we still have a good amount of Charge Rod. All of these decks, as far as I'm concerned, they have one real thing in common, and that is that they are efficiently and consistently doing huge, big, powerful things. In Dusk Road, we saw a lot of strategies that were powerful, but in a different way. It almost felt to me like it was just kind of like this grind, this ruthless, efficient grind, right? One of the most popular cards from all of set 3 was Unseen Commando, and everybody died to that card so many times. And Unseen Commando was powerful, but the thing that made it powerful was just its ability to sort of swing tides, but not end games, right? It just swung things, and it was just so efficient. It pumped up all your stuff. It had lifesteal and all these things, but it was slow. It was very slow. All of these new strategies are blazing fast. The FJ decks, the Recano decks, they are churning out Icarias very consistently on turn 5, 6, or 7. And you have to have some sort of strategy for Icaria, some way under it, some way over it, or really, really efficient ways to deal with it, or you're just going to lose because most decks just cannot beat an unanswered Icaria. Berserk decks are literally killing you in one turn. They wait for you to have a weak opening and they blow you out of the water. And in the meantime, if they aren't quite doing that to you, they have 4 copies of Awakened Student and 4 copies of Alessi. Alessi being almost like another Awakened Student. These very small units that are able to build up very quickly and just outclass, all these Oni Ronins and Mercano Outlaws. They're 3/3s and 4/4s for 1 or 2 cost, where Oni Ronin and Mercano Outlaw just aren't quite there. Charge Rod, I need to go into just how much that blows you out and how it can just do crazy big things. And then time mid-range, it's not doing any one-turn things, but it is so efficient. And with cards like a lead, it guarantees that if you don't have a good answer to some of these early game threats, that they will just go over the top of you. And so you need to be quick, and you need to be fast, and you need to be able to have uh, really solid strategies for the time being to be able to compete with this stuff. And a lot of these vanilla beaters are just not there. Um, Tony, did you happen to have any input here on maybe some of these other vanilla beaters or other sort of similar units that maybe once were as good as they used to be, but just aren't quite pulling it anymore?
Yeah, well, I had the thing for, mostly Oni Ronin, Rakano Outlaw, and all of those, and maybe Unseen Commando can fit in that category, is that,
Almost.
uh, whereas either your unit is here or unit has been destroyed. There's there's a lot of decks that have a lot of spot removal right now, especially those FJX decks. Of course, time mid-range has killer effects, but time mid-range in general lacks removal. But we have Equivocate is at an all-time high and stuff like that, which makes Warcry's not as efficient as it used to, because
Yes.
when you have a 2 mana 5/5 quick draw Warcry because you attack 3 times with Only Ronin, which is pretty much the dream scenario, it still dies to the same thing, except Torch, of course, but like it still dies to a killer spell, it still dies to Annihilate, Vanquish, and stuff like that. So Warcry as a whole is not as effective because there's so many fast spells and so many ways to kill units now, and the best decks have a lot of those ways built in. And like when you equivocate a 5/5 Rokano Outlaw, you've gained so much ground because only Ronin's strength is as much as on the body than on its war cry. It means that only Ronin is not as effective, and the thing that it war cried is not as effective as well. So it kind of those kind of spot removal kind of does double duty, uh, and yeah, I feel like also Rizan for these kind of aggro decks, Rizan has been such a big beater,
Oh
and
yeah.
this card has completely shifted the like burn queen slash whatever you want to call it, but like you know classic um, stone
Stone
scar
Scar Aggro?
aggro charge things. Like
Yes.
Rizan is just a beater for this deck because it's a 2-for-1 lifesteal flyer, which is all things that Stone Scar don't want to see. Of course, it's on 6, but like, of course, FJS decks have a lot of ways like spot removal to deal with the early game. So those kind of strategies, those kinds of early game strategies are not as effective. Like I'm not saying that all low to the ground aggro lists are not as good or are not good at all, but my point is that cards like Ricano Outlaw and Oni Ronins have suffered from this heavy spot removal meta. Uh,
Yes.
and yeah, Warcry in general, of course, Icaria is going to be insane because Warcry 5 is not the same as Warcry 1, right? But
Yeah.
Warcry in general, Warcry 1 is is not as strong right now, and I don't see it being super strong until we're gonna see some changes because, yeah, as I said, more spot removal and just way more ways to deal with the Warcry units. And if you don't play the big thing, you just playing, as you said, almost vanilla effect kind of unit, right? And also, Rokano Outlaw has to deal with a 2-mana 3/3 right now,
Yes.
which is super popular. So you don't care about the quick draw when it's a 2/2, right? Because
Yes. Yes. You don't care.
the answer to the 2-mana 3/3 is either Torch or Rapid Shot or Annihilate, right? So the Rokano Outlaw as a standalone card cannot compete with Teacher of Humility.
Yeah, I would add to that. Yeah, Teacher of Humility, Alessi, and not a new card, but Awakened Student are really defining a lot of the early game units, right? Because they are 1 and 2 cost units respectively, and Humility Teacher of Humility comes out as a 3/3. Awakened Student comes out as a 2/2, but gets very enormous very quickly. And Alessi is a 1 cost unit that very consistently and very easily makes it to 5/5, 6/6, 7/7, and so forth. And that's a big bar. Now they have answers and they have ways around them, right? And it takes them time to get there. But if your strategy involves, you know, just little 2/1s and 2/2s for whatnot at the same cost as these, you're in a tough spot. That said, I will say that Burn Queen and Stone Scar Aggro is a little bit better, and this is a scenario where Oni Ronin is actually fine, but it's just in general, right? Like again, they're not unplayable, but uh, they're just not as strong as they used to be. I think so many players here probably remember, about a year ago where you couldn't, everybody's biggest fear was turn one Oni Ronin, and it just felt so devastating. And we've really come a long way since then. It was not that good in Dusk Road, and it's really not that good now, compared to where we've been. And a lot of that is because of just these big standalone one and two drops that really just set the bar so much higher than sort of these little vanilla beaters of old. So let's go ahead and uh, talk again now. More cards that are uh, used to be very powerful, but just aren't quite there anymore. This one still sees in play, just like some of the other ones, but is so much more limited in its usability, and that is Permafrost. Now, Primal, thank goodness, has gotten so many tools this expansion that it doesn't really feel too hindered by the lack of Permafrost. Once upon a time, many players remember that Primal didn't have much going for it, but nobody's saying that anymore because Primal definitely has a lot of really great and fantastic tools. But one of those is not Permafrost. And I would say that there's two real reasons for this. One is that mostly in the Berserk decks, but Accelerated Evolution, I believe is the name of the card. Yes, Accelerated Evolution is really seeing a comeback, and it is a great card to play because of all these spells matter decks like TJP Berserk, that allows it to have sort of a weapon effect while also being a spell at the same time. Having that in the main board of most of these TJP decks is really brutal for Permafrost, and you just got to be careful with how much removal you're playing that can be too easily ousted. And that's reason number one is Accelerated Evolution. But reason number two, which is a little bit more popular, is just how ubiquitous the Time Merchant is, Aurelian Merchant, and being able to grab a infinite hourglass at almost any point is just so brutal, and gets rid of all of the permafrost and any other stun effects on the field. And I think there's still room for permafrost, especially in markets when you can pull it out against a deck that you know is not using it. But playing and dedicating a whole card in your deck to something that is either not useful at all against many of the FJX decks, like Ikaria Blue and whatnot, easily removed by all of time mid-range decks, and also easily removed by TJB Berserk. That's a one removal spell that's bad against all three of the tier 1 decks, and yet I still see it on a very regular basis. So I would say shy away from your permafrosts, and if you want to be removing stuff with Primal, as we talked about before, start moving into Hailstorm.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's few decks that you wanted to have both Permafrost and Hailstorm besides like
Yes,
maybe
very few.
Big Huru and Feln. But yeah, also I feel like right now Permafrost should be used as kind of like a very small crystallize like in the market. So I agree with you. It should be like a one of in the market. Uh, and you put it you pull it off when like you're so close to lethal, but like you just need to stun a unit on this turn and ace space and win.
Yeah.
Because also Boar is very strong against permafrost, and
Oh, that too.
there's like
Yes.
a lot of and silence is always somewhat prevalent. Not as much anymore, but it's still there somewhere. Uh, so there's a lot of answers to permafrost. So yeah, it's a very awkward card, and you will feel so bad when you permafrost like in Alessi, and then they just play half a card and they gain stats, they gain armor, and they destroy your one card. It
Yeah,
just feels bad.
that's a spanking. That's
Yep.
just a huge blowout there. Um, so yeah, there's one other card that I do see a lot, which we had both talked about that is really hard to justify right now, as sad as it makes me, because this is actually one of my favorite cards, and that is Jotun Feast Caller. Um, I would just say in general that the bar has really risen for what five drops can do. And in the case of Jotun Feastcaller, size really does matter. You can't play a five cost card without having uh, there's a lot of things that need to justify it. One, in general, we talked a little bit earlier about a millie, but playing a five cost card or even a four cost card without much immediate impact is really risky right now. Not for all decks, right? But with Equivocate in particular, being a end of turn, on your opponent's turn weighs 2 power just to remove any unit. And the fact that they can remove any unit and then follow it up by just killing you while you're tapped out, right? And you have no power open. Playing a 4 or 5 cost unit is a really big deal. Jotun Feastcaller gets around this at least a little bit with an Aegis, but it still doesn't do anything when it comes down. So it can be like, levitated and then equivocated, or, some other way to, stop it and remove it and whatnot. It doesn't fly. It has no evasion, and it's only a 4/4. And in a world of OLEDs around every corner, and then turn 5 Icarias, and all these other things that are at least 5 or bigger, you're playing just a 4/4 for 5. And the decks are just so good at continually just putting big things on the field that you really have to you got to be really tight about what you're doing. And unfortunately, such a slow and dirtily card like Jotun Feastcaller just doesn't match up against a lot of these things. That might change. There's definitely a metagame where Jotun Feastcaller can come out. If we get into a swing where people are playing Hailstorm a lot, I can see Jotun Feastcaller really making a comeback as it survives through both your Hailstorms and opposing Hailstorms, and just draws so many cards against those types of decks. But right now, I see at least one or two Jotun Feastcallers like per hour, and I can't imagine that there's anybody in the top couple hundred ranks really getting too much success out of it. And I don't think we've even seen a single Jotun Feastcaller in the top 8
Well,
since this started. What would you say?
uh, okay, so I'm gonna start with my impression on the card, and then I there's actually one player that plays it on high ladder. Uh,
Ooh, oh, okay,
but
okay.
so first of all, thing with Jotun Feastcaller, of course, it's 5 mana and you need to pay 3 primal, which is very costly. Which means that you can't play it in a 2 faction deck, 3 faction deck rather.
3 faction, yes.
Except if you're heavy on primal, and those are like the Channel Tempest kind of deck. And so we've seen Jotun Feastcaller be popular in Felon Control, which you know sucks so hard right now. Its film control is so bad right now that, of course, you don't see Jotun Feastcaller. You don't want to play Jotun Feastcaller in that deck. Well, I mean, you would want to, but the deck just sucks. And afterwards, there's the JPS super heavy control deck with like Channel Tempest and sort of Sky King and stuff like that. And we've seen like one player, Mr. No Time Man, he put an article
Oh yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
week,
yeah, yeah.
and it's like a 2 of in his deck. And even then, I feel like I feel like Jotun Feastcaller isn't so great in uh, this kind of deck, even if it's kind of the dream scenario, right? Because in theory, the deck just removes everything, and then you can hit with Jotun Feastcaller to draw a million cards. And of course, we all got blown out by Jotun Feastcaller drawing like a million cards, but it's such a win more card, and I feel like there's way better option as a 5 drop or as a card draw engine. That I don't think this should be an inclusion, even in that kind of deck. It's so awkward, and when
I
you're like
yeah.
playing from behind, playing a 5 and a 4/4 feels so bad. And if you're already ahead and you play Jotun Feastcaller, it means you would have won anyway. If you're in a position where you can play a 5 mana 4/4 Aegis guy, you've won. So just play anything else.
Yeah, that's true. I will say it's probably really important for breaking open control mirrors and things like that. So I can at least see it there. And you're right. I did forget about the unit list deck by Mr. No Time Man who does play that. But yeah, poor Jotun Feastcaller. I missed thee, but unfortunately, the game does not miss you right now, and has not seen play. Um, but these are a lot of things that are not as strong right now. And we talked about what are these things that are holding them back. But now I thought we would talk about what we think is really underplayed at the moment, and what cards and strategies are really poised to make a comeback based on how they are matching up against some of these current cards. Some of these are already starting to see play a little bit, but even then have a lot of room to be explored and utilized more. So the first card that I want to talk about is, in my opinion, the most criminally underplayed card right now. It should be illegal. Somebody should send you to jail for not playing this card, at least if you are in the card's faction, Shadow. And that card is Sabotage. And the reason this card is just so strong right now is that all of these decks, with the exception of some of the, maybe not monotime, but even against Praxis, this card is useful, because most of these decks, but particularly Berserk and the FJ Rakano, big whatever decks, they really are, them and so many of the other decks going around, all these combo decks and all these obelisk decks, they're all focusing on really particular pieces that need to all come together, that they don't necessarily fall all the way apart without them. It's not like they're two card I win the game combos, but right, a berserk deck without its stand together becomes really vulnerable. Or if you're really dominant in combat, taking out its finest hour really gives you control over combat and stops them from really getting that edge. An obelisk deck like Praxis Tokens without obelisk is a lot weaker. A FJX deck, right? If you are trying to get in and you're being aggressive, taking out their harsh rule really cripples them, or whatever their earliest removal is. Or if you have Aegis units and they have a harsh rule and a rune hammer, take out that rune hammer, and now they're in a really tough spot against the Kenna decks that still is around. It's just still a really good deck, by the way. Being able to take out End of Hostilities, all of a sudden it has all these tribute enablers with no tribute.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, go ahead.
Also, do you guys hate Charge Rod as much as I do?
Charge Rod. Wouldn't it be nice to take out the rod and Charge Rod with Sabotage?
Yeah. Also, the end of the, what's it called? The 6 mana Justice spell.
Oh, answer the call.
Answer the call. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Like, just remove answer the call and you're good to go. This is
Yep.
gonna be so big, and you're gonna be very happy you played Sabotage.
Yeah. Charge Rod, FTP Moment, Berserk, FJX decks, all of these things really don't want to get hit by a Sabotage right now. The decks that don't care about Sabotage are decks that are really redundant decks, like where everything is kind of just all doing one thing, right? Think aggro decks like Burn Queen. Burn Queen, it usually wants to keep its torches and things like that, but it doesn't care that much about it. Monotime does exist, and also Praxis, though those are like still it's not a ton of the metagame compared to all of these other decks that I just named. And even then, you can still hit out a Zenith Initiation, and all of a sudden, they don't have any interaction anymore, right? That's when Sabotage is at its weakest against a lot of these redundant decks. But against everything else, oh, it is a powerhouse right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I will say that it does require a little bit of deck building on your part, that you want to make sure you're playing a deck that cares about hitting one for ones, right? That's okay with taking out one card for another card, and that your deck itself doesn't rely not too much on a cohesive selection of cards to come together. Sometimes, yes, if you're resembling a combo, then Sabotage is great. But as long as you can, as long as you're not too, as long as you can keep up with uh, keep the tempo from having cards that are going to not only be bad in the late game, though thankfully you have the merchants now to throw away your late game sabotages. But in general, a deck that's not going to fold too hard to bad late game draws, and also one that can really take advantage of just taking out these pieces. So that one that's nice and proactive, probably with some aggressive units, can use sabotage. But otherwise, it's a great option right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second here because
Sure.
I know some people disagree with Sabotage being great versus the TJP Berserk deck because they feel like the way to beat the deck is not to counter spells but to counter the units. So then when you do that, they can't play the spells on the unit, which is
Yes.
a
Yes.
very very fair argument. But I feel like if your goal is to counter TJP, playing Sabotage alongside other very good stuff like maybe Runehammer or maybe other spot removal and stuff like that is very strong. And also just knowing what your opponent's tricks
Information.
are, like
Hmm.
it's so big because TJP has like 15 million tricks. And when you know that your opponent has these exact three tricks, well, on average, because he's going to be drawing cards, but at least that those are in his hand right now. So knowing that, he has only, three tricks left, and it's the finest hour, and it's something else, and you're like, okay, well, at least now I can play around that, and I can, do X, like torch the unit, so I can bait the finest hour, and then I can do this, and like you can play around what your opponent's going to be playing way more efficiently. Also, if you remove uh, the Berserk ability, the Berserk spell, um, the gift of battle,
Gift of battle.
y- you've just increased your win percentage by so much because, of course, now Finest Hour doesn't deal 6 anymore. It deals 3. And
Yeah.
like these other spells will deal twice as much damage and stuff like that. So removing, there's still some very very key cards that you can remove. Even though like there's so many tricks they have so many spells, but also on the plus side, uh, you're guaranteed to remove something. Where
Yes.
so it's always a 1 for 1. And of course,
It's
sometimes it can be a one for half a card because you can go with and remove accelerated evolution. But most of the time, accelerated evo is their best cards in their hand. So it's not exactly half a card if that half a card is going to win them the game, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I wanted to go back there. I didn't mean to imply that it beats the deck because obviously you still have to beat the units. I just meant that the sabotage helps you. If anything, it helps make sure your removal connects,
Yep.
right? By getting rid of the stand together, you know that annihilate is gonna hit, or you know if by taking out the finest hour, you know the torch can kill that Alessi without it, growing out of range. So it's a nice supplement. And yes, it's just there's just so much about it right now. The pulling apart decks and pulling out pieces, whether it's broad or berserk tricks, and of course the best part is just the information and knowledge from there is so crucial. Um, yeah, all of that comes together to make sabotage a very very strong card right now. Next on this list is actually another shadow card that needs to be talked about very briefly, and that is Suffocate. And the main reason I think Suffocate needs to be played more than anything else, and this might be a short-lived experiment, but uh, first off, it always has a target because every merchant dies to Suffocate, and basically no decks uh, don't play merchants. And the only decks that do play merchants are aggro decks, in which case Suffocate kills everything in there too. So you're not necessarily excited to have it versus a lot of control decks, but it does still kill something. So even just as like a 2 or 3 copy, it is always pretty good. And it is also one of the premier removal spells against Awakened Student and Alessi and Rilgen, right? Against the whole Berserk deck. And it also happens to kill Teacher of Humility, Initiate of the Sands, and like I said, Aurelian Merchant. So it's got really good matchups against those, or really matches up nicely against 2 of the tier 1 decks, and just always has a lot more targets than it's had before in the past. Do you have any thoughts on Suffocate, Tony?
Um, yeah, I I feel like it's a good card, but I feel sometimes it might feel bad, right? When your only removal spell in your hand is suffocate and they play Titan, you will feel bad.
Of
And
course, of course.
there's like suffocate is a very meta dependent removal, and in this case it has to be paired with other more broad and more efficient spot removal like vanquish, slay, stuff like that, or
Of
annihilate.
course, of course.
Of course it doesn't replace those, but it's a nice addition, especially when you're very early game focused, because those control decks don't care about that. They don't care that much about these like super high tempo cards like Suffocate. I feel like, let's say you want to play Argenport midrange, which has fallen out of favor for some reason. I feel like
How
it's
far it has fallen.
yeah,
Yes.
but if you run Sabo and Suffocate in Argenport mid, maybe you can go a long way. Who
You
knows? But
can
yeah,
you can have a lot of
it
tempo
hits
there.
a fair amount of things. It can be very strong, but I don't know exactly how many suffocates you want. And do you want three? Do you want
Sure.
two? It's a numbers game, and I'm not exactly sure, but you don't want four, and you don't
I don't
want
think you
one.
yeah.
So it's between two and three.
Unless you can have really good ways to filter through your cards and discard them and whatnot, I don't think you quite want four. But that said, I think it's just really a lot of these things are really leaning into, in my opinion, some sort of aggressively based shadow deck, right? Some shadow deck that can take advantage of such a tempo efficient removal spell like that, right? You're not going to want it everywhere. Control decks have way better things to be doing than casting Suffocate most of the time. But I just wanted to point out that I do think that we haven't seen Suffocate be this strong in a long time.
Yep.
And that's something that needs to be looked into and really see what kinds of doors it can open up for different decks. Um, Something that did see a little bit of play from this top eight that is really, really strong right now, for many of the same reasons that Sabotage is strong, is Vara's Choice.
Oh
The
yes.
two cost either silence and bounce a unit into their hand or silence and discard a unit from their hand. And you're mostly restricted to being in Xenon at this rate, but there are other ways you can always go. There is Dark Heart, the old SPG deck, Fire, Shadow, and Time, kind of just like a grindy time mid-range three-color deck that could make use of that. Likewise, there's been some TPS Time Primal Shadow decks that are popping up with Cerso's Cleaver and stuff like that that might be able to make use of it. Regardless, it's restricted in what its usage, mostly stuck to Xenon, but it's so strong right now. Silencing is very powerful, and we're in a weird world where Valkyrie Enforcer is not able to make it into most lists, and so units that are weaker to silence traditionally are able to kind of come out in spades right now. This slaps those out. Likewise, with so many people using the market to grab like an Icaria or just tutor up their big bomb right after they use it, waiting until they use their merchant and then slapping their card down with Vara's Choice is backbreaking.
Oh yeah, for sure. And also with the prevalence of a lot of Aegis units, of course, namely Icaria, but also pretty much every unit in the TJP, like in every three drop, and there's a lot of Aegis units. Just being able to remove them before they're played is so huge. Of course, there's variance in this, right? Because they can uh, if they don't have any units and stuff like it's kind of the Sabo problem where sometimes it can blank, but when you play it wisely, you're just gonna hit something pretty much all the time, and
Oh yeah.
it's such a unit-based game that Verse Choice. I'm still very surprised. It's not as played, but maybe Xenon's gonna make a resurgence. But yeah, it's a very, very strong card, and sometimes it's just kind of an equivocate, right?
Yeah. A
Because
slow speed equivocate, but an equivocate nonetheless.
yeah,
It yeah.
kind of, because like of course, equivocates high roll is that you transform a unit and it becomes a very weak unit. But this one, a lot of units are very very weak without their text. So it could work. Like
Yeah,
Icaria without its text is basically a 7 mana 5/5. It's not basically, it is a 7 mana
it
5/5.
is.
So it's very very weak. And of course, when you play Varus Choice, you want to hit them in the face and discard their Icaria. And also, with the absence of we haven't talked about this yet, but with the absence of face sieges, Varus Choice and Sabotage are
Yes,
very very
that's.
strong, because back in the day when every deck was playing 4 Waystone, 4 crests, no sorry, 4 blue Waystones, yeah, like cards like Varus Choice and Sabotage were not as good because, well, I mean, they're blocked by face Aegis that was free. But now nobody's playing face Aegis. So these very nice effects, they will hit 100% of the time.
Yes, yes. And that actually segues very nicely into this next thing that I wanted to talk about. I might sound like the crazy Talos preacher from Skyrim with my always hearkening to this archetype, but there's no face Aegis. Unseen Commando is gone. Black Sky Harbinger is nowhere to be seen, and in general, life gain is down. No lifesteal and no face Aegis. Burn has a place. There is obliterate in particular, but just burn cards in general seem like they could really exist here. I'm not talking about aggro blitz like that. I mean like obliterates. And if it were still unnerfed, good old flame blast would be really great right now. I don't think it's worth it with its thing, with its -1 damage per power ratio. But faces are really open right now. Is a very stupid way to put it, but people's faces are very vulnerable right now, and I'm not quite sure. It might just be that there's not good obliterate decks, right? That obliterate just can't quite find the nice mix, but it does hit a lot of units, and if you can get people low, obliterate is probably one of the better ways to be ending the game right now. And it was just such a terrible card during all of Dusk Road, but with all these main things gone, oh, maybe there's reason to bring back everybody's favorite 5 cost fire spell.
Please no, please no. But yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, as you said, I think the big problem is where does it fit in? And when you were talking about this, I was thinking of, like, I'm just saying this right now. I didn't think about it before just saying it right now, but maybe like a moment deck that has a secondary win condition with burn spells. Like you still have like your
Hmm.
equivocates and your hailstorms and card draw and stuff like that, but you also have a lot of burn spells, and it's good with moment. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go, but I mean, maybe it could be a thing. I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's something even crazier out there, like some sort of like a new Tomorrow deck that gets like 30 power
Oh
and then
boy.
flame blasts for 30 or
Oh,
something
not
like
not
that. I
Voda
don't know.
Blast.
Like,
No, not Voda combo with Flame Blast. Please no.
oh man, who knows? Who knows? But yeah, it's worth mentioning that lifesteal and face ages are at an all-time low right now, and we haven't seen that in quite some time. Um, this next sort of section of cards, I would say, could just more or less be summed up as fast speed removal. Fast speed removal is definitely particularly strong right now, and the main things that come to my mind are Scorpion Wasp, Island's Choice, and even Lightning Strike. All of those are particularly powerful right now. Scorpion Wasp, I'd say, be the most prominent leader here, being able to hit Ikaria through its Aegis, being able to hit all the Berserk units through their Aegis, and with the exception of Rindra in TJP Berserk, or maybe some Overwhelm unit in Skycrag, none of them have Overwhelm. And so all the damage is stopped by a Scorpion Wasp. Island's Choice, very cleanly answering any big flying unit while also, of course, countering big spells like FTP Moment and Channel should anybody start playing that anytime soon. And even Lightning Strike is really nice. Oh, and Bring Down, as I
Oh
talked about
yes.
earlier. Yes.
Well, Bring Down goes in with another card we're gonna be talking about soon.
Yes, 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 yes. Um, but all of these right now felt maybe weaker in the past. There was a lot of big ground units that 5-7 endurances and 5-6 endurances and 6-6 warp. Draw 4 million cards and whatnot. That really dominated the metagame of the past, and certainly all of these things haven't gone away. But we're seeing a lot more things where Slay just doesn't hold up because it's slow, and all you need is to just start your turn and get all your power back and unload on your opponent with big berserk stuff or a big charge rod and a large built up unit. And having access to these fast speed removal spells, even if they're more narrow in what they can hit, the things that they want to hit are all being played right
Yeah, and I feel like Scorpion Wasp might be the best in this category because it fits way more easily than, let's say, Island Choice, because Island Choice is, of course, two colors. And but yeah, all of those spells are very very good against a majority um, of the prominent decks right now. I really love Island Choice right now. I'm a big fan of Ikaria Blue
now.
right now, so like cards like Bring Down and Island Choice are very fun to me, just because like especially Island Choice is like so versatile, and I know versatility is like one of the things
Yes,
you value in a
I'm a
card,
big fan.
and this is one of the best versatile cards we have. Is like either you counter a big spell that you could have gotten blown out by, or you destroy a big guy that you would have gotten killed by. So it does double duty here, and it's still very efficient in both modes. And uh, of course, hitting those big spells like Moment, um, the rod, 6 mana
Answer
spell,
the
answer
call.
the call. Thank you. I can't remember this name for the life of me. Uh, but yeah, and it can hit like pretty much everything in time. It hits of course, Icaria is like you can hit half of Icaria, but you can hit like Rise to Challenge, and any other big spell that are very big right now. So it's it's so nice that I feel like it's a very underused card, and we should see more of it down the line.
Yeah, I I think so. If not, at the very least, just an Icaria Blue, which is definitely poised to make a comeback, or at least continue its comeback, if you
Yeah.
will. Yeah, fast speed removal is really what you want to be doing right now. Um, we did briefly hint at another card that is particularly good right now, and it is being used in aggressive strategies, but it also happens to be good against many of these aggressive strategies, and that card is Levitate. Uh, with so many Aegises out there right now, you want to make sure that your removal spells connect, and there's no better way to break Aegis than with a Levitate. Draw a card and break an Aegis for one primal is really quite efficient. And with Bring Down being so strong in the main board by itself, it does sort of lend a little bit of it makes Levitate more appealing in that instead of relying on it to make the Bring Down hit, you're playing Bring Down because it just hits so many things, and then Levitate there helps you break Aegises to make sure that it hits, but also gives you the option to kill other big units that you might not be able to get with the Bring Down. Also, fun fact, in case you didn't know, even though Sandstorm Titan says units can't fly, if you give Sandstorm Titan flying with Levitate, you can kill it with a Bring Down,
Yep.
which is mostly, not only is it useful, but it's probably one of the more satisfying things in the game to watch a Sandstorm Titan die to a kill a flying unit spell. Um, but yes, Levitate is very strong right now. It's been seeing a lot of play, and it unlike other things on this list, it's I have to put it in this realm of stuff that still needs to be played more because it's just very well positioned.
Yeah, it's just an efficient card. Worst case scenario, it replaces itself. Base case scenario, it either proc face aegis or give a unit flying. So yeah, it's just a strong card.
Yep.
Uh, you know,
And when you need something else, it just cantrips. It just draws
yeah,
you another card.
exactly.
Yeah, super good, super good. Rounding out this list now, um, we have two things. One I think is more experimental, so I'll go ahead and say that now. Uh, but this card I've been pretty big on ever since I first discovered it, and that is Sewer Sludge. For people who are looking to combat the big growing one drops and two drops that we mentioned before, uh, you need not look much further than Sewer Sludge if you are in Shadow, because that is another growing one drop unit that can get pretty out of hand pretty quickly. It's been seeing some play in some Stone Scar aggro decks. Famously, our teammate and famous ETS caster Calamdeer, also known as Gabe, played it, and he called his deck Sludge Queen. But it definitely has a lot of room to be seen to be used in other decks because it's I mean all of us have seen the wrath of 5/5s and 6/6 Alessis of just this powerful one drop that's able to grow and grow and grow. Well, Sewer Sludge does kind of the same thing. As long as you're playing big 2 and 3 and 4 drop units and curving out, Sewer Sludge seems like a nice option that I think is underplayed. And yeah, not as much because it pairs up nicely against the metagame per se, but because it does at least a little bit, but mostly because it also just seems very underutilized right now.
Yeah, I feel like once again, maybe the problem is with the archetype it goes into. But if this becomes like a 2/3, it's very, very, very easy to make it a 2/3. And when you do that, it's a 1 mana 2/3. It's a very very cost effective card. Um, I'm not like 100% down on this card just because it's when you want to play a one drop, you usually want to uh, deal some damage rapidly, and like if only Ronin isn't good enough, maybe Sewage Sludge, like it needs to you need to play two other things to make Sewage Sludge better than Oni Ronin in my opinion. So it's like sometimes it might be hard, but in the right deck, Sewer Sludge will be a beater. Also, like LSC, it's way easier to play multiple spells than to play multiple units, just because your spells are going to be cheaper, and if you play cheap units, then your Sewer Sludge is not going to grow. But I still agree that this card is underseen and should be strong, but I
Yeah,
don't exactly know where right now. Probably like yes, a low to the ground aggro deck, something like that with Queen, of course. Um,
I actually see it in more of a mid-range
oh
deck,
really?
especially in a deck that can utilize Dark Return because it'll be very easy for it to get very big and then to bring it back later on for as a one cost 5/6 or
Hmm.
something crazy like that. Maybe even a Xenon because you could give it initiation quite easily and have it utilize the fact that it's constantly growing and return it more and more. Um, but yeah, it seems just underexplored, and if not as certainly not as powerful as Alessi, but might be able to go toe to toe with Alessi.
Yeah.
Yeah. But last on our list, this one, I am very confident that is just underplayed, and that is just deadly units in general. I did talk about this a few weeks back, but things haven't changed, and deadly units seem so strong right now. We're seeing Find the Scorpion Wasp come into play, and we did see one Xenon deck top eight with a nice host of deadly units like Blister Sting Wasp, but um, Statuary Maiden is still just incredibly powerful right now. So many decks are relying on units just with really, really big numbers. Right, that we have OLED just pumping out massively strong units. I've had situations where I've had two OLEDs on the field, and I draw a card and it doubles and then doubles again. And so I think I had a 32-32 Molote and Nakova once. That was
Ouch.
that was pretty good. um, but yeah, between stuff like that and all these berserk units and whatnot, Deadly cleanly answers so many things right now without relying on a removal spell that can so often be thwarted by an Aegis. But some examples of units that are good and are poised to be used here. We have Statuary Maiden, like I said. I would go as far as to say Steward of the Past probably is fine right now.
Yes.
Maybe doesn't have too much of a home, but it'll still hit some Dawnwalkers, and it's still a 3/5 deadly for 4, which is not the worst thing you could be doing. Um, Even left right provocateur, I don't know if there's enough unit type decks that make advantage of it, but if Ikaria Blue continues to stay strong, taking all their weapons out of the deck with a left right provocateur doesn't seem like a terrible way to go. Um, Rift Knife Assassin, the 2/2 deadly Warcry for 2, definitely seems great. There's always the Shadow Merchant is great. Scorpion Wasp is seeing play, as we said, and Blister Sting Wasp, definitely fantastic. There's so many more out there, but all of those seem really good right now. And whether you're going with Xenon Killers or potentially even into other things, right? Stone Scar has a lot of deadly options, for example. There just seems to be some real room for uh, sort of more niche archetypes and other things like that to really flesh out and become very powerful by taking advantage of the fact that so many things are so vulnerable to deadly right now.
Yeah, and especially time mid-range in general. Of
Yes.
course, Deadly is a bit weaker to things like FJS because it doesn't care as much. But if you're able to pair Deadly with a ways to give them flying, because there's very few flyers that have Deadly. There's like Wasp, playable ones. There's Wasp and
Two
Wasp.
wasps.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasp and wasp.
So I mean, if maybe like there's a world where a new film list has like levitates and things like Steward of the Past or Lethal Provocateur or something like that,
I
right?
could see it. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I could see it.
pairing two up and coming cards to make the ultimate tier zero deck for the future. But
You heard it here first.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, if you want to kill units, but you don't always have the right removal for it, well, Deadly is a way to do it. And yeah, it's very strong. I feel like Steward of the Past, yes, it has been nerfed, and yes, it's not as strong as it used to be, but I still feel like Steward of the Past is still a good card, and you still
I
want it
agree.
sometimes. And I feel like Provocateur is just a worse Steward of the Past right now. But you're right, if weapons are good, then Provocateur is very good.
Yeah, it's something to look out for.
Mhm.
Not necessarily saying that it is a mainstay right now. I definitely think Stewart is probably the better pick most of the time, but uh, we could be entering a world where hey, who knows? You want to be discarding weapons.
But yeah, I feel like the best deadly unit right now is Blister Sting Wasp or Scorpion Wasp.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, but lots of room for things to move around there.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have any more cards that you think are maybe underplayed right now or underutilized?
For now, Um, I feel like Runehammer is almost underplayed, but it's not exactly underplayed. But I feel like right now Runehammer is very very strong, and it should be played in even more decks than just the FJX, right? I feel like
Hmm.
Runehammer could be played in other mid-range factions like of course we've seen it a lot in Argenport mid as well, but like sometimes I feel like big Cumbre or Cumbre of some kind of range uh, could really value Runehammer as a good removal, a good way to remove units. And uh, besides that, there's nothing that comes to mind that we haven't talked about, but I mean, it's still a lot of things. We,
Yeah, that's a lot of things for just right now. Yeah, and I think that the fact that we can talk about so many things it gives even more credence to just to how wide open this metagame is and how we're just at the beginning, which is a really great feeling to be having 1 month in. Because if we were 1 month in and we felt like we kind of solved this thing, that would be a pretty miserable time for the next 5 months. Um, It'll be really interesting to see if they have any balance changes coming up soon. I don't think that there's anything that needs to be changed right now, but they do often do a balance update about 1 month into every expansion.
Yeah,
I think
I
that's,
feel
yeah.
like the meta right now is too unstable to make any decisive call. Of course, they have like way more data than we do, but I
Yes,
still feel
yes.
like the meta is changing drastically from week to week. We like there's of course some very strong decks that are going to be mainstays, but like you could make a tier list pretty much every 5 days and they would all be different. So I'm
Yeah.
down with no balance changes for now, but I mean we're gonna see some down the line. And like if I had to nerf a deck right now, I feel like a Berserk deck is the one that just doesn't feel as interactive, like the classic fun and interactive deck. Well, I feel like the Berserk kind of decks are not in that category, but also I just lose to those decks because I play decks that lose to them. So maybe I'm biased. Who knows?
See, that's funny. I'm the other way around. I play decks that lose to big, slow control decks all the time. So if I could remove anything from the game, I don't know, probably just the entire Justice faction. But
Oh boy.
no, no, I don't know what I don't know what I would balance. I feel really great about things right now. No complaints, no complaints. Um, yeah, so hopefully they won't do any balance changes. But again, they have more information than we do, and I guess we will see what happens. But until then, I think we should go ahead and sign off today. Thank you once again for tuning in to the Seek Power podcast. If you have anything that you think is underplayed right now, we would love to hear about it, or any other strategies that you think are maybe overplayed or maybe not as good. Definitely let us know in the comments in the Reddit thread, or on our website, seekpowergaming.com. You can message me or respond to me on Twitter. I'm at Magical Brandon, and I'm sure you might be able to find Tony or I somewhere lurking around in the Discord, maybe popping our heads up in the general channels and whatnot. Um, until then, if you have any other feedback for us about our podcast, how we're doing, or anything that you want to say about us, we love to hear about that. Once again, message us in any of those channels that was just described. If you like what we're doing, feel free to support us on our or on our Patreon. I do have a Patreon open under Paradox, but this does go to help both of us in creating our content and towards keeping this going. We do have a monthly fee for running this, which is not too unbearable, but uh, it's just would really help us in continuing to do more and to make more things and to help bring a podcast that you, the listeners, want to listen to. So, thank you once again, and I think we will see you next time.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good day.
I wave my own pride and put it all on the line. There I go, voluntary punishment, self-inflicted pain.